If you've ever played a new board game or card game, usually the first thing you do is briefly read the instructions and then toss them aside thinking you already know how to play, only to then pick them up not 2 minutes later and have to reread them more carefully. And that's sort of what this week's videos will be like. We're going to take the next 4 days and discuss each of these 3 branches of government and how they all sort of play rock, paper, scissors with each other so that not one branch is more powerful than the other. Which can be a little confusing at first until you read the finer things about each branch, sort of like you would do for the board game that you're playing. Today we're going to look at the branch of government I already briefly touched upon on Friday's video. The legislative branch. If you can recall, when the Founding Fathers were discussing the Constitution, the concern about representation became one of the most intense talking points at that meeting. The bigger states wanted more representation due to their size, but the smaller states thought that giving them that representation would also give them too much power. And so because of this debate, Congress came up with a solution. Congress is made up of 2 houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Every state elects 2 members, called senators, to the Senate. In the House, the number of representatives depends on the number of people who live in a state. States with more people have more representatives in the House. And this is what I was talking about on Friday. And together it is this branch of government, the legislative branch, that creates all of the laws for the United States. But how do they do that? Well, the text gives us a simple, really simple, explanation. To make laws, members of Congress write bills. If a majority in both houses of Congress vote to pass a bill, it is sent to the head of the executive branch, the president. If the president signs the bill, it becomes a law. See, easy as that. But if you're still confused, don't worry. A lot of adults are confused about it too. We'll talk more tomorrow about what the executive branch does, so for now let's focus on just the legislative branch. And so let's put that last paragraph in some perspective for you that might make a little more sense. Let's say you notice there's an issue at school that you want to fix, besides not being able to go to school because of coronavirus. The first thing you need to do is to write an essay that contains every little detail about that problem you can think of. What is it? Why is it a problem? What should be done about it? Who does it affect? And so on, and you get the picture here. Then you present that essay to your classmates and fill them in on everything that you just researched. And hopefully now you've gotten the support of your class, which would be equivalent to the House of Representatives. Then you would take that essay to your teacher, which is one person that represents a whole group, similar to the 2 members of the Senate that represent your state. And then after presenting it to your teacher then goes and presents it to the principal, or president in this case. And after all of that, if the principal likes it, they'll sign it, approve it, and it'll officially become a law at your school. Hooray! But that's sort of where our comparison comes to a halt. If the president does not sign this bill, then the Congress has a chance to overrule this as long as 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate agree on this decision, which means the bill does not become a law and it goes right back to square one, right where it all started. In our example, it's not likely that 2/3 of the teachers would overrule a decision made by the principal. But, the first part of our example holds up still. But of course, making the law isn't the only thing that this legislative branch does. The legislative branch has many other powers. The Senate approves or rejects the people the president chooses to fill key jobs. The Senate must approve the president's choices for ambassadors or people who represent the United States in foreign countries. The Senate must approve the president's choice of federal judges. It also approves members of the president's cabinet. On Thursday, we're going to be talking about the system of checks and balances that our government put in place to make sure not one branch had more power than the other, but for now you can already start to see how the legislative branch keeps the executive branch in check. The president, who is in charge of the executive branch, gets to pick who he works with, but in the end, it's the legislative branch that makes the final decision. It's like when you're at the store and you pick out a new toy or video game to buy, but ultimately it's your parents that have the final say in that matter, even though you were the one that picked it out. But in addition to dealing with things inside the US, the legislative branch also deals with things outside of the US. Congress has some powers in foreign affairs, or the business that the United States conducts with other countries. 2/3 of the Senate must vote to approve a treaty between the United States and another country. Before the United States can declare war on another country, both houses of Congress must give approval. One main thing I hope you're taking away from this video so far is that the legislative branch deals with a lot of broad concepts and topics. Not only do they create the laws and make decisions on who gets to work with the president, but they also deal with communication with other countries, especially when it comes to the topic of war and peace. But why is that? Why do they have such a broad range of abilities? Well, think about it. Who makes up the legislative branch? It's the House of Representatives and the Senate. And who do these groups represent? Yeah, the entire country and its citizens. This branch of government is so incredibly important because it's acting in a way that the British Parliament did not before the Revolutionary War. This branch represents the common people and allows their opinions to be heard. The matters of who leads our country, what the laws of our country are and whether or not we should go to war affects just about everybody, so it makes sense why the legislative branch would have all of these abilities. They do have their limits though, but like I said, we'll save that for Thursday's video. And so since this branch of government has the common people in mind, they have another set of powers that they can use should things go poorly in government. The Constitution also gives Congress ways to remove people in the other branches who abuse their powers. The House can impeach the president, judges, and other officials. The Senate can put an impeached official on trial. If the Senate finds the person guilty, that official must resign from his or her job and can never hold an office in government again. This is a huge deal for the newly labeled Americans. Remember, they saw firsthand from King George III what happens when the government is too abusive with their power. And so should things go awry, they wanted to make sure that it was the people, not the government, that had the ability to fix things. And last but not least, before we get to our notes today, the final form of government that the legislative branch has is the ability to collect taxes and make a new form of national currency that all the states would use. Because remember, this was one of the main issues that the Articles of Confederation had. Every state had their own form of money, and so it was a pain in the neck for Congress to try and collect from all of them and pay their national army. So having the ability to implement a common currency among all the states was a huge headache reliever. Okay, on to our notes now. As you'll see on page 87, we're going to continue with our stool theme using this chart here. Down at the bottom here, we're just going to fill in this blank where it says, the Constitution created a government as steady as a stool with 3 legs. For all 3 of these sections, we'll be filling out their main responsibility, who the members were, and some of their key powers. Today, obviously, we're going to be filling in the section that says legislative branch. So let's get started. First off, the main responsibility of the legislative branch is to make the laws for our country. And the people that make these laws consist of senators and members of the House of Representatives. These are the people that represent their states. Some of their key powers include the following. They can write and pass bills. They can overrule presidential veto with a 2/3 majority. The Senate can approve or reject presidential appointments, meaning people the president picks for certain positions. The Senate can approve treaties and declare war, so long as it's a 2/3 majority. The legislative branch can also impeach government officials and then put them on trial. And lastly, they collect taxes and create a national currency. So all in all, this branch of government is pretty important. It's the branch that essentially represents the people of the United States, and the branch that makes this form of government a democracy, which we know means ruled by the people. Now that we know who makes the law, tomorrow we're going to learn about who executes the law.
Execute Order 66.
Don't worry, it's not that bad. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for today's daily dose of history, so be sure to head back to our Google Classroom and answer our question of the day. And don't you forget that on May 29th is our States and Capitals quiz, so be sure you're studying those maps, which can be found on our Google Classroom or on my personal class website. But with that being said, I'll see you right here tomorrow.